let's now discuss how to remove multiple radicals from a radical equation. This isn't drastically different, it's just a bit longer and a bit more tedious. You're essentially going to do the same thing that we just did for single radicals, just multiple times. Okay, so solving a radical equation with multiple radical signs is similar to solving an equation with a single radical sign. Isolate and remove the radicals one by one. So you're first going to isolate the first radical sign, remove the radical sign, and then you'll isolate this term and then remove it. So what does that look like? We have the square root of 2x plus 7 plus the square root of x minus 1 is equal to 4. So in order to isolate the first radical term, you want to remove all the other terms on that side of the equation to the other side of the equation. So in this case, we have a second radical on the same side as our first radical. So step 1, you're going to subtract the second radical from both sides. So instead of adding the square root of x minus 1, you're going to subtract the square root of x minus 1, leaving us with just the first radical on the left side. And now on the right side, we have 4 minus the square root of x minus 1. Step 2, we're going to raise both sides to a power of 2. That helps us get rid of this radical sign. So we're just left with 2x plus 7 on the left side. I'm going to skip the individual steps on the right side, but this 4 minus the square root of x minus 1 squared would become 15 plus x minus 8 radical x minus 1. And now we want to isolate this second radical and do the same thing we did here. So again, we're going to move the terms on the same side as our radical sign to the other side. That way we can isolate this radical. So step 3, subtract x from both sides. And step 4, subtract 15 from both sides. When you do that, 2x minus x gives you x. 7 minus 15 gives you negative 8. So you're left with x minus 8 on the left side. And now on the right side, we have just the radical sign. The coefficient is fine. Now what we can do is we raise both sides to a power of 2 to get rid of this radical sign. So you'll have to use the FOIL method to expand the left side. And then on the right side, you square the coefficient. Negative 8 squared gives you 64. Anytime you square a radical times itself, you're left with just a term underneath. So we get x minus 1. And now we have our polynomial without our radical signs. To solve a radical equation with two radicals, isolate the first radical sign, raise both sides to a power equal to the index, and then isolate the second radical sign, raise both sides to a power equal to the index, and then your radical signs will be completely removed from the equation. Let's have you do a few practice questions. Remove the radical signs from each equation. Question number 1, the square root of x plus 1 minus the square root of x is equal to 2. Question number 2, the square root of x plus 3 plus the square root of 5x is equal to 7. And question number 3, the square root of 4x minus 4 minus the square root of 2x plus 1 is equal to 1. Pause the video, answer these questions, and then press play when you are ready to begin. So question 1, we had the square root of x plus 1 minus the square root of x is equal to 2. Step 1, add the second radical to both sides. This helps us isolate the first radical, the square root of x plus 1, on the left side of our equation. Since we're subtracting this radical, we want to add the radical to both sides so they negate, leaving you with 2 plus the square root of x on the right side. Now to remove this radical sign, since the index is 2, you want to raise both sides of this equation to a power of 2. This leaves you with the term underneath, x plus 1 on the left side. And on the right side, we have 2 plus the square root of x squared. So now you want to use the FOIL method to expand this expression. So FOIL stands for first, outside, inside, and last. So first means you're multiplying the first term in each set of parentheses. Right? Since we're squaring this, you have to multiply it by itself. So you take this term and you multiply it by both terms of this binomial. So it's the first term in each set of parentheses, and then it'll be the outside. So that term times this term. The I is inside, so you go to your second term now. You multiply it by this term, so it's the inside terms. And then last means you take this term again and multiply by this term. So once we start to expand the expression, we start with 2 times 2, which would leave us with 4. Then we do 2 times radical x, which gives you 2 radical x. Radical x times 2 gives you 2 radical x. And radical x times radical x leaves you with x. Now 2 radical x and 2 radical x can be combined since they are like terms. They have the same term underneath the radical sign. So you combine them by adding their coefficients. 2 plus 2 gives you 4 radical x. So once you use the FOIL method to expand, we wind up with 4 plus 4 radical x plus x. So this is what our equation looks like once our first radical sign is removed. Now you want to move this term and this term to this side to isolate this radical sign, and then we'll do the same thing again. So step 4, subtract x from both sides. And step 5, subtract 4 from both sides. This leaves you with 4 radical x on the right side. X minus x is 0x. 1 minus 4 is negative 3. And now we want to raise both sides to a power of 2 to get rid of this radical sign. So step 6, raise both sides to a power of 2. Negative 3 squared is equal to 9. 4 radical x squared is 4 radical x times 4 radical x, which would be 4 squared, which is 16. The square root of x times the square root of x is x. So once we remove our radical signs from question number 1, we are left with 9 is equal to 16x. Again, we weren't solving for x, that's why I stopped here. I just asked you to remove the radical signs. But as you can see, x would be equal to 9 over 16 here. Let's take a look at question number 2. The square root of x plus 3 plus the square root of 5x is equal to 2. We want to isolate the first radical. So step 1, subtract the second radical from both sides. That leaves you with the square root of x plus 3 on the left side and 2 minus the square root of 5x on the right side. To remove this radical sign, we raise both sides to a power of 2. That cancels, leaving us with the radicand, x plus 3. On the right side, we wind up with 2 minus the square root of 5x squared. So we're going to use the FOIL method to expand this expression. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative radical 5x is negative 2 radical 5x. Negative radical 5x times 2 is negative 2 radical 5x. And negative radical 5x times negative radical 5x is positive 5x. Negative times negative is positive. Negative 2 minus 2 would give us negative 4 radical 5x. So once we remove our first radical sign, we have x plus 3 is equal to 4 minus 4 radical 5x plus 5x. you now want to isolate the second radical. So we are going to move this 4 over here and this 5x over here. So step 4, subtract 5x from both sides. X minus 5x is negative 4x. Step 5, subtract 4 from both sides. 3 minus 4 is equal to negative 1. So that leaves us with negative 4x minus 1 is equal to negative 4 radical 5x. Now the next thing we want to do, since this radical is isolated, we want to raise both sides of the equation to a power of 2. So we wind up with negative 4x minus 1 squared on the left side. And once we square the right side, the radical is removed. And we're left with negative 4 squared, which is 16. And what's left underneath the radical sign, which is 5x. So the answer to question number 2 is negative 4x minus 1 squared is equal to 16 times 5x. But let's go over the last practice question, number 3. The square root of 4x minus 4 minus the square root of 2x plus 1 is equal to 1. We want to isolate the first radical. So step 1, add the second radical to both sides. That leaves you with the square root of 4x minus 4 on the left side of the equation. And on the right side, we have 1 plus the square root of 2x plus 1. To get rid of the radical with an index of 2, step 2, raise both sides to a power of 2. On the left side, you're left with just what's underneath the radical, which is 4x minus 4. And on the right side, we have 1 plus the square root of 2x plus 1 squared. So step 3, we're going to use the FOIL method to expand this expression here. So the first term, we multiply those in each binomial. 1 times 1 is 1. The outside terms, 1 times the square root of 2x plus 1 is the square root of 2x plus 1. Our inside terms, radical 2x plus 1 times 1 is radical 2x plus 1. We add that to our other square root of 2x plus 1, so we wind up with 2 of them. And then we multiply the last term of each binomial. So the square root of 2x plus 1 times the square root of 2x plus 1 is 2x plus 1. So we are left with 4x minus 4 is equal to 2. 1 plus 1 will give us 2. 2 plus 2 radical 2x plus 1 plus 2x. So now we want to isolate the second radical by moving the variable and constant to the other side of the equation so that we can have just the radical. So step 4, subtract 2x from both sides. 4x minus 2x leaves you with 2x. We want to subtract 2 from both sides. Remember we had 1 plus 1, so I combined them here. So we subtract 2 from both sides. Negative 4 minus 2 gives us negative 6. So we have 2x minus 6 on the left side. And on the right side, we've successfully isolated our second radical sign. So now we raise both sides to a power of 2 to get rid of this radical. So the final answer to question number 3 is 2x minus 6 squared is equal to 4 times 2x plus 1.